life we're living today is the result of 100 years' influence, subtle manipulations, lies, and hidden agendas that have been thrown at us from certain societies, organisations, and we're here to tell you about one or two of those today. We're actually at Bernard Shaw's house, and most of you know Bernard Shaw because he was a playwright with plays such as St. Joan. But there's another side of Bernard Shaw that a lot of you don't know, and that's his membership of the Fabian Society. And we're here to tell you a little about that side of his life and who the Fabian Society represents. I just want to read you a little quote here. This is from the British Catholic Family News. It's a news service of the National Association of Catholic Families. And this article appeared in the American Catholic Weekly, The Wanderer, December 11th, 2008. And it is with permission of the author. Writing in 1992 in Fidelio magazine, the Frankfurt School on Political Correctness, Michael Minicino observed how the heirs of Marcuse and Adorno now completely dominate the universities, teaching their own students to replace reason with politically correct ritual exercises. There are very few theoretical books on arts, letters or language published today in the United States or Europe which do not openly acknowledge their most negative, destructive criticism possible of every sphere of life which would be designed to destabilize society and bring down what they saw as the oppressive order. Their policies, they hoped, would spread like a virus, continuing the work of the Western Marxists by other means, as one of their members noted. To further the advance of their quiet cultural revolution, but giving us no idea about their plans for the future, the school recommended, above other things, 1. The creation of racism offences. 2. The continual change to create confusion. 3. The teaching of sex and homosexuality to children. 4. The undermining of schools and teachers' authority. 5. Huge immigration to destroy identity. 6. The promotion of excessive drinking. 7. Emptying the churches. 8. An unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime. 9. Dependency on the state or state benefits. 10. Control and dumbing down of media. 11. Encouraging the breakdown of the family. One of the main ideas of the Frankfurt School was to exploit Freud's idea of pansexualism, the search for pleasure, the exploitation of the differences between the sexes, the overthrowing of traditional relationships between men and women. To further their aims, they said they would attack the authority of the father, deny the specific roles of father and mother, and wrest away from families their rights as primary educators of their children. Abolish differences in the education of boys and girls. Abolish all forms of male dominance, hence the presence of women in the armed forces. Declare women to be an oppressed class and men as oppressors. Munzenberg summed up the Frankfurt School's long-term operation thus: "We will make the West so corrupt that it stinks." And I'm sure that you can recognize a lot of that agenda going on right now, today, in present times. We've got Robert Theobald today. He's going to tell us about the history of the Fabians and join the dots for you. And Robert, would you like to tell everybody out there who's watching this and connect the dots for them and tell them how this all links in?
Yeah, I'll try to do that, Fern. You started off talking about the Frankfurt School of Communists. Well, we can link that. We can make a link there to George Bernard Shaw pretty much straight away. This is a quote from the Dublin Evening Herald, 3rd of February 1948, and Shaw says, "I am a communist, but not a member of the Communist Party. Stalin is a first-rate Fabian. I am one of the founders of Fabianism, and as such, very friendly to Russia." So you've got a link there straight away. But of course, the Fabians were, I shouldn't say were more subtle, I should say are subtle. They were and they are. Although they supported communism, lots of the Fabians actually disapproved of what was going on in Russia. But Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw, who started the Fabian Society, they went over to Russia in about 1934 on a visit. I think they both met Stalin, actually. George Bernard Shaw, well, Sidney Webb. Then when he gets back to England, he's ostensibly the writer of a book which was called, I think it's called Soviet Communism: The New Civilization, more than 1,000 pages. But anyway, in about 1950 something, a Soviet KGB colonel, I think his name was Bogolepov, Colonel Bogolepov, or something like that. He actually spilled the beans. I think it was a congressional hearing in the United States. He spilled the beans, and he told everybody that that book was actually written by him in the Soviet Foreign Office. So that will show you the degree of cooperation between the Fabians and the Soviet Union, at least the Soviet Union in the Stalin's time. But you need to know a little bit about this Fabian society, because it was started around 1884, and it's got communism associated with it right from the very beginning. For example, Karl Marx's daughter, Eleanor Marx, she was one of the first group. Engels is associated as well. I've got a little book here. I've got a little booklet here, which is put out from Australia. There's a quote from Karl Marx here. Actually, I just find it because it's he's talking about about communism, and it's quite a shocking quote, really.
While Robert's looking for his quote, and I bet he made his masses in this book, I can see from here. I just wanted to make a comment, really, but the only thing I ever knew about Fabianism was watching the BBC drama Upstairs, Downstairs. Brilliant production. And in one of those episodes, the daughter of the house actually joined the Fabians. And you can see from that production, and they're usually very, very well researched with the BBC, that the primary motive of the people at that time, it was like the latest thing to do. And it was the upper middle class, the rich, suddenly finding a conscience there, and they were going out and becoming aware of the terrible conditions that the poor and of the city were living in, and trying to distribute the wealth to help. So you can see that Fabianism had good ground there, and with that motivation, it soon got a really, really good following. But like with many cults and societies, there's always the outer layer of the ordinary man on the street that is doing good. He's there because he believes it's doing good. But there's always an inner circle in these groups and organisations that have that ulterior motive. Anyway, back over to Robert.
Thanks, Vern. Yeah, there's a quote here from actually from Karl Marx himself in Murracut's book. This is the book Options. Fabians have carefully told us that Marx was under no illusion about his Das Kapital being rubbish, stuffed with statistics to pad it out. Just before it was published, he wrote a letter to his friend Engels, dated 2nd of April 1858, in which he stated quite frankly, the whole Scheisse, which means shit in German, because he was a German, as you know, the whole Scheisse is to be divided into 6 books: 1 capital, 2 landed property, 3 wage labour, 4 state, 5 international trade, and 6 world market. So that's a quote from, and that's quite interesting there, because you've got, when he says the world market, of course we've got this globalisation now, which of course is pure Marxism actually. But to get back to the origin of Fabian society, it's the 2 biggest figures in it are George Bernard Shaw, we're at his house here today, and Sidney Webb. And George Bernard Shaw was an Irish man. He was a playwright, he was an author, he was originally, earlier on, he was a journalist. He was a perfect front man for the Fabian Society. He was a public figure. The ladies loved him especially, and very rich ladies and blue stocking type of ladies thought he was marvellous. He was a good front man. Sidney Webb was the other one of the double act. Now, he was a sort of a little insignificant little fellow with a squeaky voice, and he was the kind of He was the kind of engineer behind it. He was the one that understood the legal matters, and he understood the way the civil service worked, and he understood the way the British government worked. So he was he could supply that technical side of it, you see. The next question is, because how did they actually put all this into operation, and what did they actually do? Because they're so such a little bit known about them, and yet they've had such an enormous effect. How did they do it? Well, first of all they decided that, let's go back to the name, the Fabian Society, for a start. The Fabian Society is named after Fabius Cunctator, who was a Roman general. Cunctator means delayer in Latin, and he was the Roman general that was sent out from Rome to hold back Hannibal, to keep Hannibal back from the city of Rome. Now, Hannibal had a very, very powerful army. Carthage was a very powerful state, and Hannibal was going for Rome. Fabius was the one that was sent out to try and hold him back, and he did it in a very unconventional way for the times. He used delaying tactics. He used what would today be called terrorism. He used all sorts of tactics like that. He basically letting the enemy make the mistakes, and he was terribly criticised by his own men and by the people in the city, by the Roman people in general. But he actually delivered what he set out to do, which was to let Rome have enough time to assemble a sufficient army to do battle with Hannibal and to overcome him. You see, and after that, of course, the Romans gave him a great deal of acknowledgement, and they were very thankful to him. And then he became dictator at a certain point. But he was that's where they get the name from, you see. Because at that time, in 1884, not many people, certainly not the common people, would have any knowledge of the classics. So they wouldn't really understand where that name comes from. In the early days, they're basically pushing socialism. This is what they're out to do. Some people say, what's the difference between socialism and communism? Well, there isn't really very much, actually, but in fact, the USSR, the name of the USSR, Soviet Union, it was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. It wasn't the Union of Communist Republics. It was the Socialist Soviet Republics.
Yeah, that's right.
They wanted to push communism. Shaw and Sidney Webber and the Fabians, they wanted to do it in a different way. They wanted to do it in a gradual way. They wanted to use gradualism, the same way that Fabius had used it. They knew that they couldn't achieve what they wanted straight away. So they thought, well, the only way we can do it is to do it on a very, very slow way, and we'll use influence. We'll use our subtle influence. They knew how to write articles and so on. But incidentally, in the first few years of the Fabian Society, it's recorded that they were giving 700 public lectures a year.
Wow.
Now that's an awful lot of public lectures, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, and they would be giving those to trade unions and well, really anybody that would listen.
Yeah.
You see, so that was how that's how they got the thing going.
Yeah.
Now what actually the thing is, what actually motivated them? That's the interesting question. What motivated these guys to do it? You see, and well, not only guys, because there was ladies as well. There was Eleanor Marx, who was the daughter of Karl Marx.
Mm-hmm.
Incidentally, two of his other daughters committed suicide, the daughters of Marx. So they were obviously very unhappy.
Yes.
Anyway, there's other women. There was Emmeline Pankhurst, the famous suffragette. She was in it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Annie Besant.
Yeah.
Annie Besant is the theosophist.
Yeah.
Which is basically occult. Is an occult belief.
Yeah.
It's
they had a lot of teachings from the East, didn't they?
Yeah,
From India and whatever.
Yeah, Annie Besant, she's famous. Yeah, Annie Besant actually she actually promoted this man called Krishnamurti.
Yeah.
To be the new Messiah, you see, but that kind of fell through. But this is the occult side of it.
Yes, yeah.
These are the early ones. But then they realised that to make their progress, they had to work with the trade unions, which they did.
Does that link them in with the Labour Party?
Well, yeah, they're very close to the Labour Party, but I wouldn't say they were close to the rank and file of the ordinary working man, the ordinary rank and file of the Labour Party. I wouldn't say that at all.
But do we have them in government now? The Labour members in government?
Oh yeah, blimey!
So that's how they get their influence today.
We've got 200 members of Parliament who are members of the Fabian Society.
Wow!
And it's been like that pretty much down the line. I think in the time of the Attlee government, which was the government that came in after the war.
Yes.
That when Churchill was kicked out in 1945, Attlee government came in.
Yes.
There were more than 200 Fabians in that Parliament as well.
Right. So modern day Fabians. I've seen a picture of Tony Blair against the Fabian logo, the famous window.
It's the Fabian window. It was designed by George Bernard Shaw, and it's actually got George Bernard Shaw himself and Sidney Webb, the co-founder of the Fabian Society, and they're hammering at a world which is on an anvil to change it. They've got a group of men and a group of women on the window, which are Fabian men and Fabian women. They're dressed up in 16th century clothes, by the way. I don't know why they did that, but they were. A fascinating part of the Fabian window is the shield, which is above the world, which is on the anvil. The shield shows you the Fabian wolf. It's the Fabian wolf in sheep's clothing. It's a black wolf, and he's got a white sheepskin on him.
Yeah.
You see, so that will show you how crafty they were, and they were actually having a joke with people. Shaw was when he commissioned that.
Oh, Shaw commissioned them.
Oh yeah, he commissioned that.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes,
they've got other symbols as well, actually. There's one here, which is you can see it. This is on the Fabian regional and government thing, and it's nearly all these Fabian publications have got the Fabian tortoise.
Hold it up.
And what does it say on the tortoise, Fern?
When I strike hard.
And
That's on the logo.
Yeah, and if you go to New York, you can actually go to, there's a part of New York called Turtle Bay.
Oh,
which is where there was a Fabian colony around there. So in the park there's a little column, and it's got the Fabian tortoise on it.
The Fabian Society is not just in this country, then it's in America as well.
No, it's all over.
It's all over.
Yeah, I mean the Fabians, the Fabian who went out from England to more or less proselytise America for the Fabian cause was Graham Wallis. Yes. And he would have been the one that would have been in touch with people like John Dewey, the educationalist, who basically changed the whole American education system.
Yes.
To change it over to socialism.
If this sounds a little bit sweeping for the viewers, but we recently put out a DVD of a gentleman called Norman Dodd, and he was the chief investigator of the Reece Committee, and that was set up pre-80s. He died in the 80s. It goes way, way back there. And he was investigating the tax-exempt foundations of America. And that really does involve us here. It's not an American thing only. It's more like charitable trust, we'd call them here, wouldn't we?
Well, yes, it's interesting you should say that, Fern, because the big Norman Dodd talks about the Ford Foundation.
Yeah.
He talks about the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. What's the other one he talks about?
Rockefeller
the
Foundation.
Rockefeller.
Yeah,
the Rockefeller.
And it was the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, wasn't it, that actually admitted to him that their agenda was to mould mold America, melt America into Soviet Russia, wasn't
Well,
it?
yeah. Who was it? Rowan Gaither, wasn't it? Rowan Gaither, I think.
That's right,
Rowan
yes,
Gaither
yeah.
said
Yeah.
that we're under presidential special order
Yeah.
to so render America similar to Russia that America and Russia can be comfortably merged. I
That's
mean,
it,
it sounds
yes.
absolutely bonkers, but it's true.
It's true.
Yeah.
He admitted it. And also we know that these foundations, especially the Carnegie Foundation, is funding education over here. And they're the ones that are putting a lot of the socialist and Marxist literature in the schools. You can see it now to this day. The Bournemouth, Southampton universities both have funding from the Carnegie Endowment Foundation in America. Rockefeller is concentrating on the American education, and Carnegie does the international. I mean, look it up, you'll find it. But R. Coones, C-O-O-N-E-S, and look for Norman Dodd on Google Video and watch it for yourself. It's going to join a lot of dots for you, and it goes way... These are the people that are funding and pushing this from behind, aren't they?
Well, yeah, it's fascinating you should say that, Fern, because if you go to the London School of Economics, they call it was expanding very fast 100 years ago or thereabouts. In fact, they used to call it the empire on which the concrete never sets, and so the London School of Economics was actually funded partly by Rockefeller.
Right.
So you get that.
Yes.
But you're talking about the Carnegie Endowment. But that's just to tell you a little bit about present day situation. One of the trustees of the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace is actually Lord Carr of Kinlochard. Now, he's just been to the Bilderberger meeting in Greece. He's a trustee of. He's a Rhodes trustee. He's a Carnegie Endowment for International Peace trustee, and he's also a Fulbright trustee. But we're not talking about him at the moment.
Yes, because the Rhodes scholars tie up again
yeah,
with something else. This is a huge big web we've got here, isn't it?
Yeah, we're talking about the Fabians.
Yes, so we go back to the Fabians, so we'll be here all night.
Yeah, talking about George Bernard. Let's go back to George Bernard Shaw first.
Yes,
because,
yes.
In this book, The Brotherhood of Darkness, which is by Dr. Stanley Monteith, is an American gentleman. Now, in that book, he's got an important quotation from George Bernard Shaw. It's on page 48 of Brotherhood of Darkness. And Shaw says here, "I also made it quite clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing, and that under socialism you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character and industry enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. But whilst you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. As far as I know, I was the first socialist writer to whom it occurred to state this explicitly as a necessary postulate of permanent civilization." That is that comes from his book, An Intelligent Woman's Guide to Socialism and Capitalism. It's what it is. It's Fabianism is elitism, and you can track it back to Plato. Plato thought that things were best managed by a benevolent dictator, who knew best how you should live your life and what you should do.
That ties up a little bit with, as I was reading out before we started talking here, to further the advance of their quiet cultural revolution, by giving us no ideas about their plans for the future, the school recommends, among other things, and one of those was dependency on the state or state benefits.
Yeah.
And as you were just reading out there,
Absolutely.
it's completely total.
Well, if you come, actually, where we are at the moment, we're at St Lawrence, which is in Hertfordshire. About 5 miles over there is Welwyn Garden City, but that is based on Fabian philosophy. There's also another one as well. Actually, the first garden city was Letchworth, which is up that way, about a dozen miles. Mm-hmm. And Letchworth actually has what they call a settlement. settlement in inverted commas. A settlement, that's a Fabian precept, and the first settlement was actually Toynbee Hall in East London. That's where these well-heeled Fabians would go and do their charity work. You see, at the Toynbee Hall.
Because upstairs, downstairs.
Because it actually comes from the philosophy of Ruskin.
Yes.
Because Ruskin said, he was a professor at Oxford, and he said that the only way that we can maintain the British Empire, which he considered to be the most superb empire that's ever existed in the world, he said the only way that we can actually maintain English civilization is to spread it to the lower classes.
Yes.
You see, so. And that way we can maintain our empire. That is part of the strand of where it's coming from, you know.
Yes. I think when they say empire, they mean more like our national identity roots, don't they, rather than the colonial empire.
I think that's changed a bit, actually. If you talk about empire, I'm sure people like Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb were very, very conscious of power and the power that this country had, but they didn't necessarily look at it in the conventional way of nationalism as you or I might look at it. Their idea was a bit more subtle than that. In fact, the Fabians were directly involved in dismantling the British Empire. They were the ones that started it all off. Yes. They even had one of their Fabian front organisations, the Fabian Colonial Bureau, that was involved in it all. And you could say, well, why would they want to do a thing like that? Well, they regarded the empire as it stood as an obstacle to the spread of communism. I see. So it had to be knocked down. And then you get people like Nkrumah in Ghana, and I think Kenyatta from Kenya, and lots of different people from the empire came to England to be educated in Fabian ways, you see. Oh, I see. And they were very much involved in that. They basically knocked the empire down. They wanted to do it, and they did it. Yes. You see.
That ties up a little bit. I've just been thinking here, and a friend of mine went to a Fabian meeting, and she was absolutely appalled because the speaker there was speaking out against nationalities, and she was speaking out against private properties, that sort of thing. But doesn't that tie in with, if we wander off a little bit here, but it doesn't really wander off because it's all under the same umbrella, as it were, sustainable development.
Well, sustainable development is a way of that's a very, very nice sounding thing, actually. It sounds lovely. It's a thing that everyone aspires to in there, I suppose. But in actual fact, sustainable development, the political concept of sustainable development, is a very, very evolved thing, and it is in essence the promotion of world communism. That's what it's about. Even the Soviet Union had the promotion of sustainable development in their Soviet constitution, because if you think about it, if you want to spread your communist power across frontiers, what better way of doing it than via the environment? You say, well, of course, my factory here is producing some smoke, and it blows over onto over the border onto your country. Obviously, we've all got to get together to solve these problems. It's a very clever way of promoting communism, and I think it's in Dr. Stan Monteith's Sustainable Development syllabus, which I haven't actually got here, but you can get it off his website on www.radioliberty.com. He tells you, he's got you a quotation there from, I think his name is Karl Blois, who was the Moscow correspondent for the the Daily World or something. It's in America. It was a United States paper for communists. Anyway, Karl Blois was his name, and it's Bloice, and he was an associate of Gorbachev. And he said the environmental movement promises to bring more people into our orbit than the peace movement ever did. So they're using it to promote socialism, world government. You see, obviously everyone that's sensible wants to preserve their environment. Of course we do, but we don't have to have communism to do it. We can do it in a more intelligent and better way than that.
It's one of the tools that they're using. Then, obviously, global warming, the controversial global warming. Yeah. Is a way of getting us to accept it.
Well, you can tie straight back to the Fabians now, because I told you that they've always promoted the things they want to do via their front organisations.
Yes.
There's been lots of them, but maybe we'll talk about one or two more. But the one I'm thinking of at the moment is an outfit called Local Works, and Local Works is associated with Charter 88, which is a Fabian organisation. And what Local Works has done, and they are doing, is to promote the Sustainable Communities Bill in the United Kingdom. Yes. They've actually succeeded in promoting it in England, not in Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, but in England at the moment. And they're working on getting it in the other parts of our kingdom. What that is, that Sustainable Communities Bill, it's very, very cleverly packaged, in my opinion.
I went into the website and I looked at it, and it seemed amazingly good that you would giving the local people a say in all their local affairs and get back. Listen to this: get back our post offices, sort out all the transport, probably may even open the train lines again. Get us all the industry in the local villages, whatever. It sounded absolute paradise.
Well, I think that's how they sell it, Fern.
Yes.
Because take the post office, for example. Now, Lord Mandelson, I'm sure that he wouldn't be very much in agreement with that. He wants to sell our post office off to TNT, which is a part of the Dutch post office.
Yeah.
So
they seem to be working against themselves. Yeah, they're not, are they?
No, they're not. But the fascinating thing is they sell it really, really well.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman come to visit me the other day who's a representative for a company that I deal with, and he announced to me that he was a member of CAMRA, which is CAMRA. You know what that is, don't you? That's the Campaign for Real Ale, which for people in America and in other countries, it's quite active here, obviously, because there's lots of people that like drinking beer, and they like it. They like it to be nice, good quality, and not too adulterated and sort of full of chemicals and so forth. So that it's quite an active organisation, you see. So, but they've actually this Local Works, which promotes sustainable development, Sustainable Communities Bill, has roped in CAMRA, you see, because CAMRA feels very attracted to this idea of local control and promotion of local business and all this, growing local food. So they've been attracted into it. And I tell you who else has been attracted into it: the Countryside Alliance. Now, I can't think of anybody more conservative than farmers.
Right.
Well, conservative with a small c.
Yes.
And yet they've been roped into this now. And I don't think the ordinary members, if they knew what it was about, would be that enthusiastic, to be honest with you.
What is the actual agenda then of the Sustainable Communities Act?
Well,
where are they actually going with this?
Where are they going? Well, if you look down the list of things that they want to do, they actually want to promote sustainable development, which is the United Nations Agenda 21. That comes right down the list. That comes right near the bottom of the list, after all this stuff about keeping your local post office open,
which the government is doing the exact opposite, aren't they?
So it comes right down the bottom of the list, you see.
Yeah.
And they're if you go into, for example, freedomadvocates.org in California, they've done a lot of work on exposing to people what the Sustainable Development United Nations Agenda 21 Sustainable Development really is, and it's a communist thing. So it ties back. So the Fabians are still promoting communism, but now they're doing it in a very modern way. They're doing it via sustainable development. The way it works on this Sustainable Communities Bill is that in the local community you have to write into your council, and then the council has to take notice of your letter. If you request them to implement the terms of the Act, the council has to do it. And it has to be put into operation, and it says it really is something with teeth, and I think it probably is. But I'm very sceptical about it.
Because this Agenda 21 is being implemented now, isn't it? It's the taking away of private property, taking the wildlands in America away from the people and sort of driving the people off the land.
Yeah.
That sort of thing, yeah.
It's to do with, well, it's in two bits actually. It's the Wildlands project, which obviously is very much to the fore in America because they've got so much wildland anyway. Yeah. We haven't got much here. But the other half of it is urban smart growth.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, they've got that in America, and so have we. If you look at any new development, they'll never tell you this, but that will be built to conform with the requirements of Agenda 21.
Yeah. We'll have to put a link on this too. We did a little video about this last year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's a good one. If you want to go in depth in this, it's a very hard subject to tackle in a short space of time.
You can't do it in an hour, but you see, this Bernard Shaw, where we're in his garden now, he understood very, very well understood that the way that you do the way that you promote communism, the way that you take people's freedom away from them, is slow and incremental. And of course, this Sustainable Communities Bill is a perfect example of that. It's gradually creeping up on people.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, and it's the same. It's the incrementalism. If you suddenly arrived in a country and said, "Well, that's it, folks. We're taking everything away, all your freedom away. You can't do this and you can't do that. That's the end of all that." Because there'd be an outcry, but they don't do that.
This is again from the paper I was reading out before the video. This is by Christopher Dawson, Inquiries into Religion and Culture, and it's on a paper. This was article put out by the Frankfurt School, Conspiracy to Corrupt, by Timothy Matthews, but this is so relevant today. Western civilization at the present day is passing through a crisis which is essentially different from anything that has been previously experienced. Other societies in the past have changed their social institutions or their religious beliefs under the influence of external forces or the slow development of internal growth. But none, like our own, has ever consciously faced the prospect of a fundamental alteration of the beliefs and institutions on which the whole fabric of social life rests. Civilization is being uprooted from its foundations in nature and tradition and is being reconstituted in a new organization which is as artificial and mechanical as a modern factory. So it's being done from the inside. I want to just mention here another video I'd like you to look up on Google Video, which is Common Purpose, Brian Gerrish. That's nice and easy to remember. We'll put the words up for you. Common Purpose, Brian Gerrish, and then you get a whole new field to study on there as well. Fifth column, working from the inside out, and that too is following Fabian agenda. This is huge, isn't it?
It's huge, yeah. This is an important book, Fern. This is an old book, actually. It's by Lord Hewer of Bury. I think he was the Lord Chief Justice in the 20s. I think this was. Let's see the date. And it's called The New Despotism.
That's lovely. 5 shillings.
Yeah, it was 5 shillings. Yeah.
That's lovely.
It was published in 1929. Now, what Lord Hewitt was talking about, he was talking about the way that, with the new statutes and so forth that were coming in, very often it would be the minister that would decide on a particular decision. And actually, it wasn't really the minister; it was just somebody in the civil service.
Yes.
But what the Fabians did, they were instrumental in getting the Parliament Act passed in 1911, and this is it's under the Asquith government, which was actually a Liberal government.
Yes.
But there's always been lots of Fabians in the Liberal Party.
Yes.
And today the Liberal Democrats. But anyway, they're in all parties, not just in Labour. I'm sure there's even some conservative ones. But anyway, Lord Hewitt of Bury, he realised that, that by using statute law to put all these to put all this authoritarianism into place,
yes,
this was a challenge to our rule of law, actually, and he wrote this book about it. But he was aware of that back in 1929, and that's a very important book to read and to understand how they've actually put all their rules and regulations into place, and how they've tried to dismantle our constitution. And because they had the first attack on the House of Lords then, and they've attacked it regularly since then. I've got a Fabian paper actually about the monarchy, and I looked for it before I came here today, and I couldn't find it. But they're always thinking of any way that they can attack the institution of the monarchy in this country.
yes.
We've got a constitutional monarch now. They did this Fabian paper. I think it must have been about 10 or 15 years ago. One of the gentlemen that's involved in it is Professor Stephen Hassler, who's a very well known opponent of the monarchy in this country. But I looked through this paper that they'd published, and nowhere in that paper was there anything about the Queen's constitutional position or the coronation oath, where she promises to protect our laws and customs. Now the Fabian Society and Professor Hassler, he completely forgets. He doesn't forget it. He knows very well what it is. He just chooses to ignore that, and then they just keep attacking the monarchy. You know. Take away the royal train, take away the royal yacht.
Yeah.
You know, it's got to have an elected monarch and all this. It goes on and on and on. The Fabian Society has been attacking the monarchy ever since their inception. I'll tell you another fascinating thing. Back into the time of Shaw, though. Have you ever heard about the coefficients? We were talking about the Frankfurt Society. What actually is the Frankfurt Society, and how do you think it affects people in their daily life?
Well,
Frankfurt School,
the
rather.
Frankfurt School,
Frankfurt School, yeah. How does it affect people in their daily life, the activities of the Frankfurt School?
I suppose most of you out there think the Frankfurt School is just a school with a playground. You know? The headmistress and school teachers. It's not. It's because we're talking about the Fabians, I don't want to go too far into this. You can look it up. And the Frankfurt School, if you remember what I read out at the beginning of the video, the little list, that is their agenda. And it's virtually word for word the same as the Fabian agenda, and, well, some of the other organisations too, isn't it, where they tie up. But the main thing about the Frankfurt School is they're coming at it from the psychopolitics angle. They're doing the psycho stuff.
Frankfurt School fun.
Yes.
In Western Europe, there were various people that realised that communism couldn't actually be achieved in Britain and the Western European countries in the same way that it had been achieved in Russia. So a group of students at the Frankfurt University got together and they decided to work on ways where they could get communism into Western Europe, and the way that they were going to do it, well, which effectively was to break down the established society, and they were doing it with in psychological means, neuro-linguistic programming, stuff like that, and it's about the promotion of communism, which is the same as the Fabian Society, same aim, talking about how it affects us in our daily lives. It has an extreme effect on our daily lives. Everybody knows about political correctness. Everyone makes jokes about it. But at the same time as that, many people are afraid of it. For example, you'll get your own child come back from school, and he or she will say something that's obviously very, very tainted by political correctness. We get it all the time. We get it you even get it promoted by the police and everything. So, but what actually is it? It's to get you thinking. It's to stop you from thinking freely, and it's a way of putting your mind in a cage, so you can't think freely, and you can't oppose the imposition of communism, or you're less able to do so. It's mind control. That's what it is.
Yeah. It's almost as if they're taking away words out of the language we can't say anymore. And when you take a word out of the language, you haven't got a way of describing it, of talking about it to people, so you don't. And it just kind of erodes away, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it is also another aspect of this is the manipulation of history.
Yeah.
For example, Norman Dodds Norman Dodds talks about where they were trying to, people like the Carnegie Endowment and the Rockefeller, they were trying to change the American school books regarding the American history and the American Constitution and so forth. So they actually got a whole raft of young people, young professors and so forth, and they actually sent them over to London to be re-educated, so that they could be the new generation of writers of history. But they would write it in a slanted way. So this is about manipulation of manipulation of people. If you don't know your history, you're under a very, very severe disadvantage, because you can't talk about your natural rights and so forth if you don't know your history. And if it's been messed around with, you're very severely disadvantaged, aren't you?
This was actually one of the books that Robert's brought. You've seen this one already, but I want to go back onto this one, because this was actually from 1942. To see sixpence on there. Regional government. So this is not a new idea brought about by Prescott's Office of Deputy Prime Minister at all. And it's not a new idea brought about by the European Union. So exactly what is it? And why have we got this regional government in 1942?
Well, it's if you want to drastically change anything, one of the ways of doing it is divide and conquer. So during the wartime, the Fabians occupied they had some important positions in the British government. They decided that they would let Churchill and the Conservatives get on with running the war. They wouldn't interfere, but they were going to get ready for the socialist government in 1945. This is part of their preparation, where this is long-term stuff. This is long-term planning, and they're very, very good at that. Let's give them their credit. They're very, very clever at working on long-term plans. This is what it's all about. Slowly does it, and the regionalism has been promoted all over the world. I'm sure you know, in the United States you've got how many regions is it? Was it 6? I can't remember. But it's been regional. They were talking about cutting the United States up into regions right back in the 30s,
and crossing state borders.
Yeah, and it comes from the Fabians and their associates in the United States. Obviously, we tend to think that it's the European Union that's regionalised everything.
Right. Yeah.
But actually, these are the roots, and of course, the European Union has got Fabian roots as well. It goes back a long, long time. Now, what's very interesting about regional government, as promoted by the Fabian Society, it comes in. John Christian talks about it in his communist councils in New Zealand. I know that this paper is, to a very large extent, accurate, and I know that because I've given it to some important people, and they've acknowledged to me that it's very reliable to give you an idea of how things are going in the world today.
Right.
I mean, Colonel Barry Turner did the notes in amplification of it.
Yes.
You can actually see Barry Turner's notes in amplification on the Australian League of Rights website. Now, the Fabian Society had a 5-year plan, that was promoted.
Doesn't that tie up with Gordon Brown 5-year plan?
Yeah, well, it's a communist thing. All these 5-year plans and 10-year plans.
Yes. We're hearing that all the time from
that's
Gordon
right.
Brown.
That's right. And it tells you here, the British Fabian Society planned to take over the world by the City of London financial community was first published in a book called All These Things. All These Things by a New Zealand author and journalist, A.N. Field. The book was first published in 1936 by Omni Publications in the United States, and it was censored in New Zealand. The document, called Freedom and Planning, was secretly circulated in 1932 by the inner councils of the members of the Political Economic Plan, otherwise known as PEP in London. That's a Fabian organisation. PEP, Political and Economic Plan. The then chairman of the organisation was a City of London Jew, Israel Moses Seif, who was the reputed author of the plan. The headquarters of PEP were at 16 Queen Anne's Gate, London. Mr. Seif was also chairman and financier of Marks and Spencer's chain stores, and he was vice president of the British Zionist Society. Centred around the City of London Jewellery's international financiers in the Bank of England subsidiary, called the Bankers Industrial Development Company, the essence of the document Freedom and Planning was, and still is, to gradually Sovietise the world based on their 5-year plan, inaugurated in Moscow in 1927-28 in the Soviet Union. Basically, the plan involved the subtle transfer of the entire productive capacity of each country throughout the world into a series of great state-owned departments, which would then be corporatised, then privatised, a City of London corporation, international banks and corporations which they control. Individual property ownership would be severely restricted, with most of the land, sea, fisheries, rivers, lakes, ports, railways, communications, media, roads, electricity, energy, food, water, waste management, housing, farms, commercial properties, schools, hospitals, police, social welfare, inland revenue, etc., transferred into statutory corporations.
That sounds like the Sustainable Development Service.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
Companies or land trusts, which indirectly would be owned by City of London banks. The peasants, they would still be allowed to own their own clothes and small assets like furniture, cars and boats.
Toys.
But the main assets of each country would be owned by their multinational corporations and banks.
Wow.
In essence, the City of London Corporation would become the One World Earth Corporation and would privately own the world. Similar to the experiment carried out in the USSR, the whole world would eventually be transferred into a communist United Nations World Soviet Socialist Republic, where each country would be regionalised and ruled through regional councils, through a United Nations dictatorship called a Parliamentary Assembly, which would just be another name for a Soviet Central Committee, and all independent, sovereign national governments would be totally abolished. So you see that ties in, Fern, with this regional government.
It does, doesn't it?
You
Yes.
see.
Yes. 1942.
1942. They were talking about that,
1942.
yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Talking about abolishing national sovereignty, there's quite an important one here. This is a quotation from Arnold Toynbee. Arnold Toynbee was a Fabian, and he was co-originator of the Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Ah.
Well, that's Chatham House. So, right.
That's another side road, isn't it, that ties up with Tavistock and Frankfurt School.
Well, he tells you straight here. He went to a meeting in Copenhagen in 1931.
Yeah.
It's not concealed. They're quite open about it.
Mm-hmm.
This is what Toynbee says. If we are frank with ourselves, we shall admit that we are engaged on a deliberate and sustained and concentrated effort to impose limitations upon the sovereignty and independence of the 50 or 60 local independent states which at present partition the habitable surface of the earth and divide the political allegiance of mankind. So that's Toynbee speaking, Royal Institute of International Affairs. That just reminded me of another thing.
Yes.
Now, the Royal Institute of International Affairs was started 1919, I think, just after the First World War. Now, I was checking up a gentleman called Sir Henry Martin. He was the Vice-Chancellor of Eton College,
Yes.
which is just across the River Thames, from Windsor Castle. Now, Sir Henry Martin, he was actually the Queen Elizabeth and Queen Margaret's tutor
Oh, really?
on the history
Yes.
and constitution of this country. Now, I've done a little bit of digging around on Sir Henry Martin, and I don't know that he was a Fabian. I can't even say that he was or not, but I've got no proof of that. But I do know that he was a member of the Royal Institute of International Affairs from at least 1921, and right up until his death. And I also do know that there's a considerable overlap between the membership of Chatham House, which is Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the Fabian Society. There's quite an overlap there.
Right.
So there's a good. So you can guarantee that Martin would have known Toynbee, and Martin was the man that taught our Queen the Constitution and the history. Now, lots of people. Lots of campaigners concerned about our Queen. They say, well, she made the promise in 1952 to safeguard our laws and customs, and plainly she hasn't done it, because she's signed all the European Union treaties.
Yes.
Not once has she ever put her foot down, as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So you could say, well, she was taught by Henry Martin. Is this Royal Institute man?
Yes.
And he would have been in the Royal Institute. He would have been rubbing shoulders with all these people, such as Toynbee and Fabians, and people that have been deliberately involved in breaking down the national sovereignties of the different countries.
Yeah.
So.
Just a little aside there before I ask my question of Robert. For the American viewers out there, I just want to point out the Royal Institute for International Affairs is a sister organisation of the Council on Foreign Relations. So look them up. It's the same kind of agenda. So anyway, Robert, I was going to say about the Queen here. It's very, very hard for us Brits, isn't it, to take in that the Queen is anything but benevolent to a country. She's such a wonderful, respected lady here.
Well, she's meant to be our final safeguard of our freedoms and customs and our laws, isn't she? So, the problem is she uttered this oath at her coronation. She uttered an oath and she promised to safeguard our laws and customs. That's in her coronation oath. It's part of our constitution. But she hasn't done it, because she's handed over so much power to the EU. But they do it in a very crafty way. They say, "Oh no, the British Parliament still has the final say," and it's true. Actually, we can repeal the Treaty of Rome in 24 hours. It's true, but I think many British people are very disappointed that the Queen doesn't actually exercise her power, or she doesn't seem to be executing her power or her obligation to safeguard our laws and customs. She doesn't seem to have done that at all.
It has been done, hasn't it? Quite recent. I think Queen Anne did, and one of the Georges
I think
quite recently refused to sign an act. It was a bit of a constitutional crisis, but it can be done.
It can be done, but the Fabians deny that. They always deny. That's part of their thing. They say that the monarch never sends back a bill and never refuses to sign a bill. But that's not true, because several monarchs have done it. Yeah. And I think it was King Edward in the early 20th century. I think he sent one back.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but it has been done. But the Fabians put it about that it's never been done. You see, but they need to actually take down our monarchy to fully put their agenda into practice, and they've been chipping away at it for a long time.
It's becoming really obvious now. As I said, they're trying to break down all our traditions and all our establishments, established institutions that make us who we are, and they're turning the law system. We don't respect that anymore. We don't respect the police anymore. Even the good old fire service, you know, our lovely old firemen, the British Bobby, and all the way they're knocking on about the Queen and the royal family, and when that goes, and now it's Parliament. We all know right now, this minute, they're absolutely attacking the MPs.
They are.
I mean, okay, they've done something wrong, it's come to light, but nonetheless, it's just pulling away from the inside everything that makes us who we are. And in a way, the Queen is the last bastion of our sovereignty, isn't she?
Well, well, she actually, the way that our constitution is worked out, yes, the Queen is the guardian of our liberty. Yeah. Also, obviously, the Queen wrote on the Bible. Now, the thing is, you see, that the Fabians and the communists, they abhor the idea of God, because they can't actually put their plan into place when there's God there, it's him that's provided you your freedoms.
Yes.
But they want to turn that on its head. Everything that you've got, as George Bernard Shaw says, we will provide you with everything. We'll give you a house, a job, clothes. But if you don't actually prove yourself worthy of all these things we're going to give you, we might give you the friendly gas or something, he called it, just knock you off, you know. But because they want to usurp the power of, they want to usurp God, and that is really the thing that's motivated me probably more than anything else, Fern.
Well, they're attacking the Christian churches.
I can't bear the idea that these
yeah.
people set themselves up as the ultimate authority. I cannot bear it, and that's why I thought it'd be a good thing to come over here today and talk about it.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, we've got so many people in this country who know a lot of things like this, but what we're trying to do is connect all the dots for you and give you a big picture. You know, Robert's got so much knowledge at his fingertips, and more books. What have we got here?
Well, we got some other. This is a big one. This is a big important book. This is by Rose L. Martin, Fabian Freeway. It's published in America, in Chicago, 1966. That gives you so much information about the start of the Fabian Society, obviously right up to 1966. Incidentally, the person that's mentioned in there is Edith Summerskill.
Oh.
Now, Edith Summerskill,
so
let's bring this right up to date.
Yeah.
Edith Summerskill is the grandmother of Ben Summerskill, who's the main light in Stonewall, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and was it transsexual group that pushes for promotion of their rights.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, so they have Fabian connections.
Oh, yeah,
too.
yeah. His grandmother was Baroness Summerskill, and she was a stalwart of the Fabian Society. And isn't it interesting that Ben Summerskill has now been co-opted onto the Fabian executive?
Oh, really?
He's on it. But the other interesting thing is that there are various there's certain groups, and there's one group that I was checking up the other day called Gay Mafia Watch. And these are a group of homosexuals and lesbians and bisexuals and transsexuals. They're a group of such people who've said, hang on a minute, we're fed up with being manipulated by the likes of Summerskill, Ben Summerskill, and his organisation, Stonewall. In other words, Summerskill with their crafty political manoeuvrings, they've tried to use those people, those homosexual people, gay people, and so forth. They've tried to use them, and some of them have cottoned onto it. They've twigged it, and now they're saying no. We've had enough. So they're being used for political purposes. Yes. And of course, this Gay Mafia Watch, they go into the meaning of the word Stonewall, and it turns out that Stonewall wasn't this club in New York where there was a riot in the 60s. It was it was the nickname of a man called Claiborne, who was in the American Civil War. He was actually you think he was a homosexual himself, but he wanted to use the freed black prisoners on behalf of the British forces, you see. But anyway, you can read it, you can check it out if you want. Anyway, I haven't gone into that stuff about Claiborne actually myself, but I know that those people are being manipulated, and some of them are getting fed up with it.
Yes,
and Stonewall is a Fabian front.
Right.
Yeah.
They've got fingers in all the pies, haven't
they're
they?
up to everything.
So many fronts.
They're up to everything. They're up to all the modern communications. They're on They're up to Twitter and Facebook and all the stuff. All the modern stuff.
Yes.
They're right bang up to the minute. And but they're still pushing the same old agenda.
And Gordon Brown.
Yeah, well, because he is, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Brown is
Big Fabian,
big Fabian, yeah.
Yeah.
Incidentally, when the Attlee government got in after Churchill was kicked out in 1945, they made a complete mess of everything. We had food rationing for, I forget, 4, 5, 6 years after the war finished.
Yes.
You could only have 1.5 eggs a week, even 4 or 5 years after the war finished. They had identity cards, rationing for everything. There was goodness knows how many government organisations that could just come into your house with no permission, and it was coming on for a Soviet state. You know, that was the Fabian government, and they actually propped that up with money from the United States. And then at a certain point, and Harry Dexter White was involved in that. Harry Dexter White, American, and it was later found out to be a Soviet spy. They were milking the United States to prop up the Fabian government. And then when the Americans twigged it, and they stopped it, then they had to put the tax up. They just couldn't pay for all these projects that they've been having, you see, and they didn't last much longer after that. But they're economically, of course, they're a washout. In actual fact, that's quite. If you go on to Lyndon LaRouche's website, now we don't agree with everything Lyndon LaRouche says, but he's extremely well informed on many things, and he's done an awful lot of research. He's a learned man, although he's got very, very distinct opinions on things.
Yes.
He says here, Fabianism is among the principal expressions of that systemic moral corruption which has been employed as a weapon of psychological warfare to render nations and their peoples increasingly stupefied morally as much as intellectually, and also less and less productive per capita and per square kilometre. I always found something a bit incongruous with Mr. LaRouche, because I could never quite understand how he's enthusiastic for Franklin D. Roosevelt and his government, what he did and so forth, and yet Franklin D. Roosevelt had Fabians all around him in his government.
He did.
He did. Yes,
Even
he did.
then,
He
yeah.
did. Yeah. And I could never quite figure that out. And I sent a message to Mr. LaRouche and asked him that question. You know, why is it that you promote Franklin D. Roosevelt so much? You know,
Yeah.
when he obviously had some Fabian, he had Fabian people round him, advising him and so forth, like Judge Frankfurter, you know, people like him. And he wrote back and he said to me, well, he said the reason, he said, but Franklin D. Roosevelt always did everything strictly to the American Constitution, so therefore that was all right as far as he was concerned. But I was always a bit worried about it. It seemed to not quite fit in for me.
Yeah.
And I'm still not quite sure now, but anyway, I keep reading things and trying to learn more, you know.
That's the secret, really, isn't it? You just got to read everything, and don't close your mind if you don't like half of what they're saying. It doesn't mean to say the other half isn't right, you know. It's just the whole thing is don't take anyone's word for it. Look it up yourself, because it's the information's all there out there, isn't it?
Yeah. The other thing we never spoke about, of course, was the Hegelian dialectic.
Yes.
George Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb, they pioneered the use of that, which is in debate, which is where you put forward a thesis, then there's a reaction to it, and out of that reaction comes the synthesis.
Oh, that's problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah, that's right.
David Icke.
That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
really
Yeah.
good.
So Bernard Shaw and Sidney Webb, they pioneered that, and of course you can imagine a man, such an accomplished man as George Bernard Shaw.
Yes.
You can imagine him in a debating situation, can't you?
Yes.
He such a command of the language, so witty, so clever. Of course, obviously he could steer the debate pretty well, I would imagine.
Isn't that something, the Delphi technique?
Yeah,
they call that.
Delphi technique. Yeah, that's right.
Problem, reaction, solution. If you want to know what that is, on a sort of this is kind of a small scale. If you were to go into a town and say, we're going to put cameras on every corner, this is a nice town, say in the 50s, times when you used to leave your door open when you went shopping, let your toddler wander out and play up the street, yeah? So you walk into this town and you say, right, we're going to put cameras on every corner. We're going to follow all your trips in your cars so we know everything you're doing. There'd be,
hullabaloo,
yes, complete hullabaloo. They wouldn't allow it. No. So they know they want the cameras up. How are they going to fix it? So they cause a problem. And that problem is caused, we stop punishing children for vandalism. We stop punishing children for mugging, looting. We have drunks all over the street. People become afraid to walk through their town centre. Then they come up with an idea. Tell you what, let's put some cameras up in the city centre and we'll film everything that's going on and we'll protect you.
More control.
Yeah, you'll feel great because you'll feel safe then, and we can see, and everyone will say, yes, please, and now they're asking, please, will you put cameras up? Job done. Problem, reaction of the people, and their solution pops in. And that's kind of a small scale. This is an enormous big scale operation too. It goes from the smallest decisions right up to the big ones.
The war is a classic Hegelian situation, isn't it? You scare everybody with the war on terror. Then there's got to be a reaction and a synthesis, which is more and more control and more loss of freedom.
Yes.
And the interesting thing is that I was reading the other day that the BBC said that they admitted that there was no such thing as Al Qaeda anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But nothing's going to be done about it, we know. Anyway, we're not really diversing away from Bernard Shaw and the Fabians because they're at the root of all this stuff, aren't they? They've got their fingers into every little part of this. You go digging back far enough, and there they are.
They've got 6,000 members in UK approximately.
Yeah.
Which of course is a tiny amount, and out of those 6,000, it'll only be a tiny inner core that are manipulating things.
Yes,
The inner core,
yes.
you see. So really, they're a tiny handful of people that have had enormous effect. The clever thing, one of the clever things they do, they always keep a low profile. That way, they don't get into any sort of big public controversy and so forth. They're always under people's radar, but at the same time as that, they're working. We didn't mention the classic way that they work, which was set up, which is permeation and infiltration. Permeation and infiltration. Now, incidentally, infiltration, that would have been carried out by the Fabian women before women had a big part in politics and so forth. They would be talking to influential people in the drawing rooms and influencing them and all this.
Yes.
Infiltration, getting into every type of organisation and influencing it from within. It doesn't matter what it is, Conservative Party.
That would be women's organisations, feminist
anything you like, Women's Institute.
Family planning stuff.
Anything, the other thing is permeation is also, today is known as consensus. It's the same thing. So whenever you see the word consensus, we're seeking a consensus on this. That's the Fabian way. Got to get a consensus because you can always get a consensus on something. I mean, if I'm your utter enemy, and I can't stand you or anything to do with you, there's always some little thing where I can make common cause with you.
Yes.
Something,
Yes.
Even if we say, well, the road that runs from your country to mine, yes, we've got to have a joint committee to look after it. Yeah, all right. We'll make common cause on that.
Yeah.
So they always find some little thing to make common cause on. Obviously, the environment is a big thing.
Oh yes.
So that's a perfect thing for them to
Yes, that's right,
to do it. You see.
Yeah, and that's pulled a lot of other groups in together, all working with them, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
This is something I'd like you to see now. The inside cover of this book, the Fabian window. And we have to remember for a minute, Gordon Brown recently coming out, and he's talking about the New World Order. It's a sort of a buzzword these days. Well, here it is, the New World Order. So I'm just going to ask Robert to tell us quickly what this one's about, and then he's going to sum up for us what we've been talking about today, and I hope we can send you off with some really good information to go and investigate for yourselves. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, this is written by Dennis Cuddy, PhD. He was in the United States Education Service for many years. He knows the way that education was managed and manipulated in the United States, going right back to the time of John Dewey. In that booklet, he gives you a history of socialism, but he goes back much before that. He goes back to French Revolution, and he goes back to Saint Simon, who was an important figure in the 19th century, and takes it really from an American angle, which is important obviously it's important because he's an American, but it's a jolly interesting and very informative book, that one. And Dennis Cuddy, he goes on to Radio Liberty in California very frequently. That's www.radioliberty.com, and he's frequently being interviewed on Radio Liberty with Dr. Stan. He's on the American website as well, News with Views. I expect you've seen that one, Fern, haven't you? News with Views.
Yeah, we can get all these, go on the internet for the radio station too, can't we?
Yeah. He's a very knowledgeable man, Dennis Cuddy.
Yeah.
So it's important to read some of the things that he puts up.
Right.
I think that it's appalling, actually, that a tiny group of people who know how to manipulate the masses have had so much influence over the last 100 years or so. I find it unbearable that they should have been up to all these pranks for all this time, but pranks that have changed everyone's life. And I do think the only way we can try to change things is to educate them, because Fabians always went in for what they called education. It comes into their literature so much education, but what they consider to be education and research is their other word. But you can guarantee whenever you see Fabian education and Fabian research, it's always twisted to fit in with their aims. And what we can do is to learn about what they've been up to, and be very, very conscious of it, and tell other people about it, because they've had it their own way for too long.
You're right. We've got to fight back. We have got to fight back. There's millions of us, and there's only a few of them. So go back to the list that I read you out at the beginning. The Fabian agenda, on the go now as we speak. The creation of racism offences, continual change to create confusion, the teaching of sex and homosexuality to children, the undermining of schools and teachers' authority, huge immigration to destroy identity, the promotion of excessive drinking, emptying churches, an unreliable legal system with bias against victims of crime, dependency on the state or state benefits, control and dumbing down of media, and encouraging the breakdown of the family. That's just a part of what we're seeing at the moment. So that's it. Go away, investigate it, tell everybody, and hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, Robert.